Welcome back to Spectral Productions video production blog. In this series we are going over the basics of character rigging by rigging the first human character of our independent production, The Last Rite, Shellington Heights. If you're following along, you'll know that we left off creating the keyframe leg controls. We had just finished doing the FK and we're starting on the IK controls. For those very new to rigging, one of the questions I've been asked recently is, why do you need both FK and IK? And the one thing I can say is you definitely need IK, especially in the legs. If you don't believe me or you have any doubt, try doing a walk cycle with just FK. It's nearly impossible. To that end, why do we need FK? Well, 9 times out of 10 you actually will probably IK the legs, but there are always going to be situations where IK is not ideal, and to be able to go back and forth is going to be important. If you followed my article in 3D World issue 141, I talked about creating a rig where you can switch between IK and FK. If you haven't, there is a playlist on our YouTube channel that links the videos from the 3D World article, so feel free to peruse those, and it will cover that in depth. So as we left off, we have our IK handles for the leg. We got one for the leg, got the ankle, and got the toe. The reason why the toe is an RP handle is because we're going to have to use constraints to drive that to fake our floor contacts. And if you constrain an SE handle, they tend to stop evaluating properly, and then you have to refresh it. And I have, just from experience, using a RP handle with a pole vector constraint forces it to be more stable when you do that. One thing we need now is we need pivots, because we don't have any pivots for our IK controller here. So let's turn the mesh back on, because we're not really going to know where to put the pivots on if we can't see the feet. And in fact, I'm going to do one better. I'm going to turn the boots on, and we will use the boots to determine where our pivots need to be. So to create a pivot point, we're just going to create an empty null, have nothing selected, do a Control G, and that will create an empty null. That's really all a group node is a transform with nothing underneath it. And I'm going to select this, and I'm going to hit the 1 key to put it back to its low-res cage. And that's going to be a little easier to snap points to. Okay, so what we need is we need the foot to be able to rock from side to side. We need to be able to pivot here at the ball, pivot at the toe, and pivot at the heel. That's a very general foot setup, and it's worked well for me. If you had to do something way more complicated, like say for example a hula dancer, hula dancers have very intricate foot movements, and you could spend a lot more time making the foot controls way more robust. For general use, this is a bit of an overkill. Most animators that I have worked with, this is more control than they actually use. So it really depends on your needs as far as how verbose to make your foot controls, but this is more than enough for us. And I'm already seeing a problem because our character is in the floor. So that's going to create a little bit of a problem, but not a major one. We can deal with that. So let's go medial. I'm going to go wireframe unshaded so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to snap it to about there. Let's get it over there. That'll be our medial pivot. That'll be our lateral pivot. That'll be our heel pivot. And we don't got really a good snap place for the toe, do we? So we'll just have to maybe put it over here. And we're going to need a couple right here at the ball. There we go, because we'll need a ball pivot, and then we'll also need a toe lift pivot. Okay. So yeah, kind of a bummer that she's low like that. So what we can do is we can just drop all that down into the floor, and put the floor underneath the floor. It's kind of a hack. I would rather have her sitting all up on the grid, but I know how often I'm going to use this character in the film, so I can actually get away with this. But for my other characters, I would want to make sure that before I start the rigging process that foot and all, they are sitting on the floor plane. Okay, so I'm just going to build it underneath the floor plane there, and I will fix that later, and I'll deal with that later. So now I got them all parented. Notice that toe pivot and toe lift pivot are siblings. There's a reason for that. Basically what the toe lift pivot's going to do is, in IK, it's going to allow us to lift the toe up and down like that, like if you're tapping your foot. So now left leg IK handle comes under the ball pivot, under the toe pivot. The ankle comes over the toe pivot. If you come in here and, for example, rotate like this, our whole IK system is rotating from there. We can go from the heel, go like that. But there's one more step. We got a third IK handle. Where's that going? Well, what we need to do, I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to snap that right here. And that is our left toe IK marker. All this is going to go under the IK controller. So what needs to happen is we want the foot, when it does something like this, we don't want it to go through the floor. We want the toe to hit the floor. That's going to help us when we're doing our walk cycles. Otherwise the animator is going to have to constantly animate that. And it'd be nice if it's automatic. What we need to do now is actually create a floor. Let's create a NURBS curve. Snapping on. And let's just create a square. Okay, and I'm going to, just like these over here, I'm going to move that out of the way. So let's duplicate that. And let's make that a bit bigger. And this is basically going to be our floor. Alright. As we saw already, our floor is not on the 0 plane, so we're just going to move that down here, and that's going to be our floor, which is at minus 1.759. Let's just make it nice, clean, minus 1.75. Clean being a very relative term at this point. But there you go. Again, normally I would make sure that they started on the floor, but I kind of screwed up by starting to rig her as she is and didn't take into account her feet. So this is going to be our floor plane. But what we need is to be able to control the toes. So underneath the floor plane, we're going to have a toe plane. And if you are familiar with animating a motion builder, you'll know that you will have independent floor controls for each toe. Because what we need for the feet to collide with the floor is some definition of what the floor is, because the floor is going to change. Having it collide with the 0 plane is not going to work. First of all, our character's not even on the 0 plane. But imagine if our character had to walk up and down stairs. The definition of the floor changes. And that brings up my next point. If our character's walking up and down stairs, then the left toe is going to have a different floor plane than the right toe. So, you guessed it, we're going to have to make individual toe planes. So what we have here is we will have the left toe plane, and we will have have the right toe plane. I'm going to zero node both of those. So you see here, now they both have zeros, or zero parents, and all their controls are zeroed out. Let's go ahead and lock and hide that, because we're not going to need to rotate or scale those. And again, make the visibility non-keyable. So this is going to be our main toe plane, so we'll just call that toe plane. And again, zero node that. Lock and hide the bits that we don't need. Visibility non-keyable. Then put the left and right toe plane underneath that. And then this will be our floor plane. And then our toe plane goes under the floor plane. And then so does our IK controls. Oh, and we need to zero node that. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and lock and hide the scale. I'm going to keep the rotation on, because what's really handy about this is, let's say your dude's like surfing. Another kind of more practical idea of why you want to do this is if you've seen the latest video of Uncharted, where he's on a boat and the boat is constantly listing and Drake has to constantly shift his weight. Chances are a lot of that's done procedurally. They probably don't have a rig like this, but if you were to keyframe a sequence like this, like what you saw in the Uncharted 3 demo, having a rig like this would help you to create that by hand. So let's get back on topic. We're going to put our IK handle for the toe underneath the toe plane. Now if you remember, we had a little marker for that, toe IK marker. We're going to point constraint that. So now if I move this below the floor, nothing will happen. Well, what's the point of all that? Well, here's the trick. Remember that everything in Maya is local. So right now, you can see here it's translating Y is 3.477. Now it's constrained to that marker, so if I raise this, notice it is now negative 1.575, but it hasn't moved. Okay, not in world space, but it has moved in local space. It's actually had to counter animate as its parent has risen. That constraint is acting like an anchor and it's dragging it right back down. So now what we do is we come in here and we put a translational limit onto our IK handle. Now even if you don't turn the maximum on, if the minimum is lower than the maximum, it's going to complain. So I just set it to both. So now what's going to happen is if I drop this, nothing's going to happen. But see what happens when that toe plane comes up. Because that IK handle cannot drop below the toe plane. Now there is one small problem with this. Remember all those nice little pivots we added in there. Now if we rotate it up this way, notice how that toe is not rotating because it's an RP solver, not an SE solver. If it was an SE solver and we constrained it rotationally as well, then it would rotate. But what happens is if I control Z, the SC handle tends to evaluate badly and it wouldn't go back to the position it would be without having to force it to refresh. SC handles won't refresh if I undo, RP handles won't rotate properly. How do we fix that? Well, we create another null and we create a pull vector constraint. And we'll just call this left toe pull vector constraint marker. Okay, so where do we put this puppy? Well, if you select that handle, you'll see that the pull vector is already pointing out that way. So if we take that and pop it there and aim it out this way, This should give us a close approximation to where it needs to be. And it's close, but you can see that it tilted a little bit. It rotated about 3 degrees, 3.5 degrees. That's way too much. But that's no problem. We'll just lift that up. Lift it up a little more. Okay, and that was a little too far, and we'll just keep walking it down until we get it to where we want it. Much better. See, now instead of 0.01 something, it's 0y. It's almost 0 in z, and we got 0.03 in the x. And we can actually go through and maybe even try to get that 0.3 out of there as well. There, that's even closer.